We've talked about assignments, I think the very first day of this class, maybe, or maybe the second day. And we spoke about a verse that comes out of one of the Gospels. It may be, I think, Luke, that you can make the grass grow by pulling it. Reuben, if you're able to stretch your memory all the way back in time to when perhaps a parent or a guardian or a brother or a sister sat you down and kind of gave you a relatively quick examination of your life. Told you that if you do A, B, C, D, you're going to go astray like Pinocchio. You're going to lose your relationship with your parents, perhaps, that your life is going to go bankrupt, So they gave you some bullet points, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. Okay? And that was your assignment, basically. And so what usually happens with all assignments, they're very much like going out on dates. Some assignments are somewhat confusing, and so you try to figure them out like a puzzle. You can't, so you just dismiss them over time, and you forget. Some assignments require too much responsibility, and given that human beings enjoy pleasure and being slothful or lazy, they like to take the quick way out. We call it plagiarism of sorts, And in both instances, you really want to force yourself to do a good job on the assignment, but you're not there yet. You're not ready. You keep forgetting. After a while, you realize it's just too much, and you look for a quick way out. Okay. The third way, and I'm sure there are lots of different ways to approach any assignment in life, is you kind of look at what the assignment is. It's very much like Biplu's question. How do you forgive? That's a huge question, and imagine if that was to be your assignment, okay? First, you need to understand what the question is, what the concept of forgiveness is. Why would you even want to forgive anyone? Because forgiveness is a judgment. It's a judgment upon an action that you have deemed to be wrong. And that action could have either hurt you or someone that you care for. Or maybe, you're one of those social justice folks that you're driving around and you see a cop pulling this kid, to the side and just beating the crap out of him. And you say, well, that's just unfair. And you do a few things and then the cop says, forgive me. And then you have to sit back and ask whether you want to do that or not. Now, since I'm no therapist and I don't want to be a therapist, and since it'd be too much for me to sit back and figure you out and your life out, since it is your question, how should I do the assignment? And your question itself is layered because I don't know if you're really interested in the assignment or you just want to ask the question because you want to pass in grade. Maybe you're very ambitious and you want a good grade, like an A. If your question has to do with grade, I don't really care. You can do whatever you want. Is that Miss Charlotte? Yes, it is. And Yame, is that you? Good morning. Now, if you want to really do good on the assignment, I'm sure your desire to want to do good on the assignment will carry you. And you will make sure that you leave no stone unturned. So I can't answer your question. It depends where you are in your relationship with the ideas. It is also true that maybe 3 weeks is not enough time to cover 4 videos and the literature. It may be that it's enough time for you, but you sit. And thinking is a very, very difficult thing to do because you have to take an idea, you have to take it inside, and you have to have a relatively good, blender or process where you can open things up, look inside them. And whenever you look inside anything, you have no choice but to be burdened. Imagine, for example, that I was your companion in a romantic sense, okay? And now I come home every day and I'm drunk. And it's very easy for you to make a judgment. Amir is a drunk, I don't want to be around him, period. Now imagine you and I have a good day, sober day, we go out, have a cup of coffee, and I tell you why I get drunk. And I take you all the way back to my childhood. I give you information now, and that information creates sympathy, empathy, understanding inside you, and you can no longer just so easily dismiss me. Now you have to sit back and ask yourself. And remember, the moment you understand where I've been, what I've gone through, you kind of feel ashamed, somewhat even guilty for thinking the way you think, or feeling the way you feel about me. You repent to yourself, not so much me. And then you can't simply leave the relationship. The point is, good luck.
Yeah. I took an English class, and every week we had to read the Age of Reason books.
Yeah.
Frankenstein, all that. Every week we had to write something.
So, forgiveness. And then relationships. What is it?
I had a question about the first video.
Please.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about
The who?
the cab driver in the first video.
Oh, you mean the novel by Albert Camus, The Stranger. Okay.
I guess I'm wondering if the play can come back and does. Is it because all of these people really
Forgive me, Vipul. This is very quick. Not to say that your question has no weight or relevance or importance. This is what happens to all of us as we approach, I think, adulthood. That's after the age of 7 or 8 or 9, when you've been kind of brutalized into adulthood. You're sent to school, you learn the alphabets, your parents have screamed at you or spanked you enough where you just simply sit on the sofa and either play video games, because you stop breaking things, you stop breaking the sofa, plates, screaming and all that stuff. So from that point on, you become civilized, you become contaminated by the expectations of the adult world, your parents, teachers, and so on and so forth. So this is how your life is going to be from now until the day you die. You come to this class this way. You're no longer 2, 3, 4, 5. Whatever passion used to live inside you, it's gone. Curiosity, for you right now at this stage, for most of us really, it's mostly politicized. In other words, you become very political as to what you want to be curious about. And that depends on your ambition, who you think yourself to be, your definition of success, happiness, and so on and so forth, okay? So, and after a while, what happens is, they had an interview with Bobby Fischer. I don't know if you guys know who he is. Bobby Fischer used to be a world champion. He had defeated a Russian world champion. And so they interviewed him and they asked him about chess. And he said, I don't like chess. Chess is very, very, very boring because it's all about calculation. It's all about figuring out where your opponent is going to move the pieces, and you're just a step or two, in front of him. And so after a while, he says there are these rare moments where you exercise creativity, but it's very, very, very rare. And after a while, he just gave up on chess because he found it to be boring. And that's basically the life of most of us. If you examine our life, you take a class because it fulfills a certain requirement. That's moving a piece. Then you have to figure out what school you want to go to. That depends on who you are, what you want to do, what school serves you the best, and what instructors you want to take, what questions you ask in class that'll help you in writing the assignments. Everything about your life is about calculation. And the sharper you are, the more ambitious you are, perhaps even the more hurt you've experienced in life, the more cautious you are as to how you want to move your pieces. At any event, there comes a point where you're just a flatliner. Life is a business and you're minding your own business. Okay. Now, once in a while, whether it's by watching a movie, having a conversation with a good friend, going to New York as you're in a couple of weeks, this is a flatliner. Okay. that on the outside, you move around, you quack, you laugh, you smile, you do all sorts of things, and people look at you and they're impressed by what you say, what you do. But on the inside, there is really nothing inside you that's living. You're a corpse, just walking around. Once in a while, there's a hiccup. In other words, you experience this thing called pleasure, and it brings you to life. Okay? Now, one of the things, and it kind of goes back to Julian's question as well. Imagine you're single, okay? Life is not bad. You're minding your own business. Things are going according to plans. All of a sudden, you go to a coffee shop. You run into someone, and you feel something about them, and you get a rise. You get attention. You get relevance. You get meaning. You get purpose. Most of all, you have an emotion that you haven't had for a long, long, long time, and you want it. And one of the things about pleasure is that automatically the presence of pleasure brings about greed. You want more of it. Okay? But we are organisms that have certain capacities. There comes a point where you reach your max capacity in terms of holding pleasure. Maybe 2 months is basically a normal time when people fall in love and go all the way to the moon, and then they sit there at the very top of this hill, filled with passion, excitement. They write poetry, they do all sorts of crazy things for about 2 weeks, and then they kind of just sit there. And what usually happens, slowly they come back down. I mean, there are many reasons for this, perhaps because psychologically, physically, we can't really hold this emotion called love, or whatever that's intense inside you for too long, because you'll just bust, okay? Then you'll come down. And by coming down, you once again go back to being normal, because you need to be functional in life. And that's if there are no hurts taking place, if no one's going to go bankrupt emotionally, if there are no arguments or fights, it just naturally comes down. And once again, you get to be flatliner. Now, if this has been your first experience of going up, you're going to have a very intense memory of the experience. This will be like a ghost, always chasing you. Because you want to go back up here. Here's the thing. This happened to you organically. And it faded organically. Now you want to manufacture events that will take you up here. So you look at this person and say, you used to write poetry for me, what happened? You used to bring me flowers, what happened? You used to have such good times, what happened? You want those moments back. These are the sort of animals that we are, and we desire these things. And so you go on a cruise, then again you come back down, you take a couple of classes, you get excited, you come back down, you get a job eventually, you make a lot of money, you come back down. And so what the cab driver basically is saying is this. The flat line are these moments where you become aware that your life means absolutely nothing. There are hiccups. You're overjoyed, you're excited. And whenever you get excited, it's like you forget the past. You forget that life has a tendency of balancing itself out. You will become you once again, the flatliner. Just sitting on the sofa and watching TV and watching the days go by. Okay? What the cab driver says is that people have a tendency of getting consumed by the highs and the lows of life. In lows, of course, forget the lows because it forces reflection, which we don't like. None of us know how to deal with pain well. That's why America is good at drinking and smoking and porning. Okay? But when it gets high, you get consumed and then you become forgetful. Then you celebrate. What the cab driver says is the plague called life is never going to go away. So when you ask about relationship, what is the good partner or best partner to have? Does that, this is depressing enough, no? That it matters very little where you go, what you do, eventually you have to come back down here?
Yes.
Yeah. And do not be deceived by the new age teachers that you listen to on YouTube or when you read books or the Gospels or whatever the case may be, whatever inspires you. Do not be fooled by the things you read or by the things you listen to. You must always go to a place where you've always been, flat. So just in case, for example, you come to class and you share with the rest of us, I'm so excited, I'm going to get married, I'm happy. For those of us who've been there, who've done that, you're happy for you for a day, maybe a minute, but we know where you're eventually going to go. Flat. The problem, forgive me, Biplu, because his question is relatively simple too. Yours is a little bit more complicated. The problem with you asking questions about relationship, Julian, is your question lives within a certain context. That context is cultural. You are an American. You are basically the creation of the world of advertisement, consumerism, capitalism in America, being about roughly 250 years old. It has a very weird definitions of happiness and success and love and life and all that stuff. And so when we talk about relationship, you can't really escape the fact that you are an American living this particular culture, and this particular culture contains certain components that ultimately make all relationships go bad. Now, before we can talk about relationships, romantic kind, you have to understand a couple of things. You don't live in a cave or a vacuum. You live in a certain social structure governed by certain forces. You're in Oakland. You also live in an environment when time moves very, very, very fast. You're also in the cradle of capitalism. And the function of capitalism is to make sure that people are always unhappy so they can be sold things, always. If AT&T does not create another cell phone that can dance for you, sing for you, it would go bankrupt. So it has to find a way to make you grow unhappy with the phone that you have so it could sell you another one. So you could be held hostage by a contract for about 2 years. That is the function of capitalism. In order for you to buy something, you have to be disgusted by what you already have. And that goes with cell phones, with classes, with jobs, with companions. We don't have the capacity, like our parents or grandparents, to be patient, to endure, and to be content with simply 1 or 2 or 3 things. Our life no longer functions that way. And don't be a hippie. Don't assume yourself to be exempt from the social forces, because that's not the case. And in as much as you want to be profoundly content, you won't be, because society won't let you. Okay. Now, there is also another issue with relationships, and that's the following. Privilege in America is a land of privilege for the most part, despite the fact that almost 46% of the people live under the poverty line. Privilege has a tendency of dividing people, making them into individuals. That's what privilege does. Poverty brings people together. Okay? Now, when you live in an environment where it's not really a choice, just by design, everybody just has their own bedroom, their own laptops, their own cars, their own checkbooks, they have their own specialized life, you learn how to be an individual. Now, the problem with being an individual in America is that eventually you'll grow to be profoundly lonely. And it's not a healthy loneliness, as Aristotle would say. You know, you have monks, you have someone like Khalil Gibran, for example, the Lebanese poet. Or if you happen to be an artist, for example, you can lock yourself in a room and you can just paint on the canvas for hours. That's a good aloneness. It's creative. It's imaginative. You can enjoy your own company. Now, once the creative muses, or you're no longer creative in your room, once it's done, what you do when you come out, that's a different story, because artists happen to be quite funny people. they're weirdos, and I hope that none of you ever meet artists, get together with them, romantically or otherwise. Okay. Now, divorce rate is almost 60%. Addiction is almost 60%. Drinking is on the rise, suicide is on the rise, addictions of sorts are on the rise, porn is on the rise. This is the culture in which you live. Now, let's say that you come from a broken home. By broken, I mean your mom went that way, your father went that way. You come from a divorce background. Hello, how are you? Good? I'm sorry? Humanities? Yeah. Now, if you come from a divorce background, depending on the age that your parents left, they went their own separate ways, you have no choice but to suffer some cracks in your psychology. Whether you're aware of those cracks or not, I don't know how people become aware of them, because there is something about us. It's, again, another one of those 7 deadly sins in Christianity we call pride. You like yourself. You want to like yourself. You suffer from arrogance. You assume that what you assume is actually knowing. So there is no real doubt inside you. You just, whatever you touch, you assume will turn into gold. So there's a good amount of hubris to all of us, But when you come from a relatively broken past, then you have a very powerful defense mechanism. Now, again, depending on when your parents divorced, there's a good chance that at a certain stage, you begin to lose your trust in people, you begin to lose your faith in people. And it's not going to be very difficult for you to just pack up and leave. It's a defense mechanism that you kind of just cultivate over time. Because the moment you become emotionally entangled with another, they have power over you. They can tell you what to do, what not to do, where to go, all that stuff. And none of us like that. And there comes a point after a while where you say, no, I don't want to do that anymore, I'm out. Okay. Now, since, depending on how lonely you are and how cracked up you are on the inside, the more dysfunction you have inside you, the more poverty you have inside you. And by poverty, I mean you want things but you don't have, but you desperately want them. And you will gravitate towards anyone who can kind of remove some of this poverty. In other words, if for the past 10 years, no one has given you too much attention, and you come to class and I give you a good amount of attention, you have no choice but to come to this class more often and gravitate towards me. Why? Because when your hand used to go up and you would ask your father a question, perhaps he was far too drunk to respond to you. And then eventually you closed up, you clammed up. You come to this class and your hand goes up and lo and behold, someone says, yes, Julian, what do you want? Something you've never had, but now you do. So what happens to you? Little by little, you have emotions that you didn't have. I become a replacement of your father. The point I'm trying to make, the more poor you are on the inside, the sooner and the easier you can become entangled with another. Okay? Now, this day and age, when you get into a relationship, that relationship masks, a whole host of issues that you may have on the inside. But before talking about that, Kevin, are you okay? You look a little puzzled.
No, actually, I'm more clear than I have.
Okay. Let's make this a real scenario. I mean, it's a hypothetical, but nevertheless. Let's say you're a heterosexual man, that you like women, and you're uncertain if you should go out with this woman or not, right? I'll give you a couple of options. Why don't you just go out with this woman a few times and just see what happens? Here are some of the things that you should be worried about. I think last week, or I'm sorry, Monday, you asked how could you be charged of your senses, how you could ride them as opposed to them riding you. You will have basically no chance if the girl you're going to go out with is attractive. She'll just mesmerize you. She's like quicksand. She'll suck you in, and you want to be around her. Imagine that in addition to being very attractive, she also speaks well. Now, when you're around someone who's attractive, what you have is the pleasure principle. And what you want is more of it. So you want to hang out with this person more and more often. It's no different than playing video games or watching porn or hanging out with your friends. Will give you pleasure but waste a lot of your time. Okay? You want more of it. The more time you spend with anyone or anything, whether you want to or not, you will create stories. Through those stories, you will create certain emotions. The emotions that you may have for Julianne is because of the history you create with her. And that history is the product of time. When you create a history, a certain set of emotions with someone, what happens is a good amount of Julian now lives inside Juliet. There is a good amount of you that now lives inside her. If she goes, she takes a portion of you with her, and you're going to miss those parts. Okay? This is something you can do. Now remember, you're 18, you got no money, no education, your reflective abilities are quite dim, you're just a kid. But you live in America and you have the power to go out there and experiment with things. The other option is this. Why don't you guys come to my office? Better yet, if your grandparents are around, take her to your grandparents' house. What's going to happen is they're going to allow the two of you to go off for about 4 or 5 months, then you'll get married. And 2 months later, you have children. And the moment you have kids, you can no longer really think about the relationship. You need to make money. And then before you know it, you're like 60. Your life is almost done and you'll be finished. The point I'm trying to make is the following. You don't have enough clarity to know what's good for you and who's good for you. And so in trying to figure things out on your own, you're going to slip. And every time you slip, you'll get scarred. And then you'll have regrets. And then you'll get to be my age, his age, and Kevin's age. And you'll have a good amount of regret. I should have done this instead of that. So if you want to be in a relationship, if you have anyone who is mature in your life, ask their advice. Let them see for you. And let them make decisions for you.
But it's not being in a relationship, it's not to grow.
I'm sorry?
Not being in a relationship, isn't that imperative to not growing?
Well, it depends how you want to grow.
I mean, it seems like you're going to be doing everything on your own. You don't have a relationship, so all you're gonna know is what you know, instead of branching out with someone, learning together.
Well, no one told Julian to remain single for the rest of his life. All that was said to him was, you want to go out, and it's none of us do well being alone. I mean, loneliness really sucks. It leads to depression. And then, given the way this culture is going, it'll eventually be medicated. Since none of us in this class desire to be lonely and we want a companion, at least have a companion who is not going to harass you, abuse you. Eventually, all of them do, because human beings by nature are very, very lonely animals. You have to figure things out on your own eventually. But it's best to go home and just have your own issues as opposed to having your issues as well as your companion's issues. That's just too much. And when you have children, you'll have like 4, 5, 6 different issues. My recommendation, Julian, stay in school. Get your bachelor's, then get your master's, then get your PhD. By then you'll be like 27, 28. And then by then, hopefully, you'll know who you are to some extent, what you like, what you enjoy. You'll have enough money, buy yourself a nice little house. And then maybe you can start dating seriously. And then when you start dating, always go for the jugular. Ask the most difficult questions on the first date in a subtle way. Jameson? What can you say? Yes, Julian?
Guidelines.
It depends what it is you're looking for. If you have a list of what you want to get when you get to Safeway, you're not going to visit aisles that don't concern you. They may have great items. You just don't want them. You're just there for milk and some Cheerios, some chicken, and then you want to go home. You don't care about the other aisles. That's because you know exactly what it is you want to have for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. If on the other hand, you're just bored walking around the city on college, after a while, you just want to be entertained. You want your eyes to be entertained. So you'll go to Safeway. And depending how loose you are with your credit card or your money, you'll go in there empty-handed, you'll come out with 20 bags. And you won't really need most of it. Most of the people in this class, if not all, they're relatively attractive people. That's being very rich. You're also very lonely. That's also very rich because it helps you gravitate towards people. If you haven't turned into a beast, and you're still somewhat civilized, you'll smile, say, hey, how you doing? How about coffee? They say, okay. If you don't know what it is you're looking for, don't do it. But you have no choice but to do it because that's just the way things are. Let me tell you a story and then we'll go to Bipu's question.